Before today's hearing begins, I'd like to review a few procedural points. This hearing will be broadcast live on the committee's website, and the broadcast will begin following these announcements. I'd like to remind members who are participating remotely that they must be visible on screen. Logistical support issues, and that those
Good afternoon. The subcommittee will come to order. The purpose of today's hearing is to receive testimony on the 2022 budget request for missile defense programs. First, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate in today's hearing after all subcommittee members have had an opportunity to ask questions. Is there objection? Then without objection, non-subcommittee members will be recognized for the appropriate time of 5 minutes. I'd also like to ask my colleagues, and this is not a unanimous consent request, that we try to keep our public comments as brief as possible so that we'll have a maximum amount of opportunity for the closed session, which will follow this one. Ideally, we will start that one at 4 o'clock, if not earlier, because the more time we have in that session, the better. Today's distinguished witnesses are Ms. Leonor Tomero, well known to this subcommittee, who is now Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear and Missile Defense Policy, General VanHerck, Commander of the United States Northern Command and North American Aerospace Defense Command, Vice Admiral Hill, Director of the Missile Defense Agency, Lieutenant General Karbler, Commander of the United States Army Space and Missile Defense Command, and Lieutenant General John Shaw, Deputy Commander of the United States Space Command. We have a breadth of experience with this panel, and I thank you for participating. In FY22 budget requests, this administration continued efforts across the missile defense enterprise to improve our U.S. missile defense capabilities. The administration has properly funded the Hypersonic and Ballistic Missile Tracking Space Sensor, a top priority for our Indo-PACOM, STRATCOM, and NORTHCOM commanders. I'm concerned regarding the omission of the Homeland Defense Radar Hawaii because we must ensure that the entire United States gets maximum advance warning against threats from rogue nations like North Korea. I'm optimistic that the Pentagon and Missile Defense Agency are addressing the issues which had led to the cancellation of the RKV program as they pursue the next generation Interceptor. Lastly, I look forward to hearing from both Lieutenant General Karbler and Lieutenant General Shaw on how Space Command is affecting our missile defense requirements. I now turn to my ranking member, Mr. Turner, for his remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for all of our witnesses being here. This has certainly been an especially challenging year, even with COVID and high deployment rates for our warfighters. We appreciate everything that you've done to support our men and women in uniform. I'm going to begin with just a brief comment on the Biden's fiscal year budget. I'm very concerned in where it has placed us in that it is so late, having received it in June. It inevitably means that we're going to be operating in a continuing resolution. I would like you in your comments to please address how that might affect the importance of your operations. I think missile defense research and development, and certainly our nuclear modernization are areas that are most particularly impacted by continuing resolutions. I continue to point out that the fiscal year is congressionally mandated. We have the ability to move the fiscal year. I would hope that Congress might take this up and we could look to move the fiscal year to the calendar year. We would save the Department of Defense 3 months every year of waste and shutdown in important programs. And of course, as I've expressed before, I'm disappointed in the top line in the President's budget number. The missile defense budget is just one example of where the Biden defense budget comes up short. The Biden missile defense request is $8.9 billion, down from the $10.5 billion enacted last year, and is the lowest since 2016. Key programs are underfunded, such as missile defense for Guam, funding for the Homeland Defense Radar in Hawaii, the elevated radar for cruise missile defense of the homeland, and the proliferated low Earth orbit Arctic communications program. There are key budget priorities that should have been included in the FY22 presidential request. In my opinion, we must protect the homeland with the next generation of missile defense technology. One of the things that I am struck by in reviewing the written testimony of our witnesses is the key partnerships that we build with our allies through missile defense. We have Aegis Ashore in Romania, and the Polish site is 90% complete. We also have partnerships with Japan and South Korea, two other great partners that live day in and day out with the threat posed by North Korea. Turning to the Middle East, just this past month, we saw our partnership with Israel pay dividends with the Iron Dome program. It is now clear that we must replenish the Iron Dome system and help advance next-generation missile defense technology developed by the United States and Israel. And I always like to point out that prior to the deployment of Iron Dome, the critics of missile defense used to say that it is too expensive, it is escalatory, and that it won't work. And what we've seen from Israel is that not only is it cost-effective in the amount of damage that is avoided, it works, and it's actually de-escalatory because it gave Israel the ability to weigh what its options and its responses are. I hope that we look to our own missile defense doctrine as we look to our missile defense review to understand how those proven concepts should affect U.S. policy. I want to thank the chairman again for holding this hearing, and I look forward to your presentations.
I thank the gentleman. We'll now ask each of our witnesses to make their statements, which hopefully will be fewer than 5 minutes in length. Your written testimony will, of course, without objection, be entered into the record in its entirety. And by the way, I think this hearing may hold the record for the number of acronyms used in the testimony, so I congratulate all the witnesses for that. It might be an Olympic record. So the first witness will be Ms. Tomero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today before you in my previous home to speak about the missile defense threat and the department's missile policy.
Could you pull the microphone a little closer? Thank you.
Sure. And the department's missile defense policy and priorities. It's an honor to testify today with General VanHerck, Vice Admiral Hill, Lieutenant General Shaw, and Lieutenant General Karbler. Along with left-of-launch capabilities and our nuclear and conventional forces, missile defense plays a key role in U.S. defense. As missile technology matures and proliferates, the threat to the U.S. homeland, our allies and partners, and our deployed forces is increasing. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, continues development and deployment of more capable intercontinental ballistic missiles that have destabilized and reshaped the security environment in East Asia. Iran's short and medium-range ballistic missiles comprise the largest missile force in the Middle East. Additionally, Russia and China continue to develop and field increasingly advanced and diverse regional offensive missile capabilities as part of their anti-access, anti-denial strategy intended to deny the United States freedom of action to protect military power and to protect our allies and partners. To address these evolving challenges, the department will review its missile defense policies, strategies, and capabilities to ensure that we have effective missile defenses. The review will nest within the National Defense Strategy and contribute to the department's approach on integrated deterrence, We expect to complete this strategy in January of 2022. The department is committed to defending the United States against rogue states' missile threats. The department recently initiated the development of the next generation Interceptor. The NGI will increase the reliability and capability of missile defense of the United States. As this program moves forward, it will align with the administration's defense goals and priorities. With regard to regional missile defense, defenses will also remain central to maintaining the U.S. enduring advantage to flow forces into a militarily contested regional environment and to safeguard those forces should a conflict arise. Additionally, the department will continue to ensure that we bring a more integrated approach to air and missile defense to address various types of ballistic missile threats and enable defense against cruise missiles and unmanned aerial systems. IAMD will field interoperable and integrated missile defense sensors, interceptors, and command and control to improve capability against a range of threats. With regard to enabling capabilities, in addition to improving today's operational systems, we're examining new enabling technologies. Secretary Austin has noted the importance of enhancing our global network of integrated sensors. Space-based and land-based sensors enable a variety of capabilities such as detection, tracking, and targeting through all phases of flight for incoming missiles. U.S. commercial innovation is already transforming this field. In FY22, we will continue to develop the prototype hypersonic and ballistic tracking space sensor that will allow the tracking of hypersonic threats and add resiliency to our sensor architecture. The department's approach for regional hypersonic defense will first focus on defense in the terminal phase. Information superiority is critical to the future battlefield and necessary to enable rapid planning and employment in a joint operating environment. To that end, the department is developing multi-cyber hardened advanced all-domain awareness for our command and control architectures that will enable timely and accurate decision-making to address emerging threats. And we will continue to develop capabilities for left-of-launch and missile defeat that will play an important role in effectively countering limited missile attacks. Engaging and working with our allies and partners to enhance our collective missile defense efforts is a core focus area of the department. Cooperative missile defense with strong allies, including Japan, the Republic of Korea, Australia, and our NATO allies, will continue to be a strong priority. In the Middle East, U.S.-Israeli missile defense collaboration demonstrates the mutual benefits of technology sharing with our allies and partners. And we continue our efforts to strengthen missile defense cooperation with key Gulf Cooperation Council countries. In this context, my office leads a series of dialogues to discuss modernization efforts and seek new opportunities for joint research, training, co-production, and co-development. In conclusion, as the department prepares for its strategic review, I assure members of this committee that we are steadfastly committed to key missile defense missions, priorities, and capabilities, including working with our allies and partners to meet the challenge of growing missile threats in a cost-effective manner that strengthens regional and strategic stability. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, General VanHerck.
Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, it's a privilege to be here in front of you again to testify. I'm honored to serve as the commander of United States Northern Command and the North American Aerospace Defense Command, and I'm grateful to appear alongside my colleagues as our crucial partners in the defense of our homeland. United States Northern Command and NORAD are separate commands, yet we work seamlessly to accomplish the critical mission of defending North America against all threats, whether posed by our competitors, natural disasters, or a pandemic. We are in an era of a renewed strategic competition, and this time we're facing two nuclear-armed, near-peer competitors, both focused on circumventing our homeland defenses. Additionally, North Korea's recent unveiling of a new intercontinental ballistic missile capable of threatening Alaska, Hawaii, and the contiguous United States is meant to constrain our options in a crisis. I remain concerned about my ability to defend the homeland as our competitors continue to develop capabilities to hold our homeland at risk, from all vectors and in all domains, kinetically and non-kinetically, and to exploit a perceived gap between our nuclear deterrent, which I believe is the foundation of homeland defense, and our conventional homeland defense capabilities. To close this perceived gap, we must accelerate efforts to transform our culture to think and operate globally and across all domains, and factor homeland defense into every strategy, plan, force management, force design, acquisition, and budgetary decision. United States Northern Command and NORAD are aggressively pursuing a left-of-launch framework to provide the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense decision space and deterrence in strategic competition by focusing on in-game defeat in conflict. With the Missile Defense Agency leading the effort, progress on the Next Generation Interceptor is on the right trajectory, but further delays will be detrimental to our defense and deterrence by denial capability. We must also capitalize on globally layered multi-threat detection systems such as over-the-horizon radar and hypersonic and ballistic missile tracking space sensors to adequately address both the capability and capacity of emerging threats. The additional capabilities United States Northern Command is pioneering, as demonstrated by our latest global information dominance experiment, are focused on prying data from existing stovepipe networks to enable global and all-domain awareness. By ingesting data into a cloud-based architecture where the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning is unleashed, we can drastically reduce processing times across the globe to rapidly enable information dominance and decision superiority. All 11 combatant commanders endorse fielding these capabilities as soon as possible. For United States Northern Command and NORAD, if we do not possess global all-domain awareness sensors and the networks, data standards, and infrastructure to share information quickly and efficiently, our ability to defend the homeland against emerging threats, such as improved ballistic missiles, hypersonics, long-range, low-radar cross-section cruise missiles, will slowly degrade. United States Northern Command and NORAD take solemn pride in executing the Secretary of Defense's top priority by standing watch to defend our nation. I'm grateful for the trust and responsibility you place in United States Northern Command and NORAD. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, General. Now, Vice Admiral Hill.
Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for your time today. For PB22, MDA is requesting $8.9 billion to develop and deploy homeland defenses against the rogue state threat and to improve our regional defenses against existing and emerging threats. The evolving threat can be summarized as a less predictable ballistic threat with decoys and multiple warheads, potentially with nuclear payloads. Hypersonic and cruise missile threats present high speed and global maneuvering challenges to our sensor, command and control, and weapons architecture. Now, despite the pandemic restrictions, we have maintained momentum by advancing the program on several fronts this year, so I'll go through a few of those. I'll start with C2BMC, Command and Control, Battle Management Communications. We continued our spiral upgrades to integrate sensors and weapons across the Joint Force, supporting our combatant commands and services with tracking, queuing, and discrimination data. The hardened network integrates with JADC2. From a space global capability perspective to improve detection, tracking, queuing, and discrimination, Hypersonic Ballistic Tracking Space Sensor, or HBTSS, that development continues under 2 competitive awards focused on an on-orbit demo in FY23 for tracking dim boosting ballistic missiles and hyperglides. And this is a critical part of the hypersonic defense architecture. Space-Based Kill Assessment, or SCA, that is deployed today. Full Up Constellation has participated in several flight tests, and we're on track to deliver operational hit assessment for the Homeland in 2023. Moving up to Alaska to the Long-Range Discrimination Radar. Despite the pandemic, we have delivered both arrays. The light-off is underway now, which means we are radiating in coordination with the FAA to make sure that we take care of the local bush pilots. We will go to government acceptance this year, which is initial fielding. In FY22, our focus will be integration into the ground-based mid-course defense system, and then we'll transfer to the lead service of the Air Force for Space Force operations in FY23. From a Homeland perspective, continuing the GBI fleet reliability efforts through the Service Life Extension Program has been going very well, and what that means for us is we can harvest aged hardware from the silos for our stockpile reliability program. We now have hardware-based analytical background to our reliability estimates while expanding missile field capacity in Missile Field 4. I'm very proud of the soldiers of the 100th Missile Defense Brigade and the 49th Missile Defense Battalion. The next test for the GMD system is Boost Vehicle 203, a BVT-03, developing capability to use our 3- and 2-stage GBI. What we'll do is we'll fly instead of the full kinematic burn, we'll burn only to the second stage so that we can increase our battle space and enhance the timelines. That is on track for later this year. NGI development was mentioned. We are underway with 2 competitive contracts focused on round emplacement earlier than the 2028 government estimate. I'm going to switch over to one of our regional systems, Aegis Integrated Air and Missile Defense. We continue our deliveries of the SM-3 Block 1B missiles, the workhorse of the fleet, through a multi-year procurement. SM-3 Block 2A missiles, developed in cooperation with Japan, we are now in production, and we continue our close coordination with the Navy to leverage the SM-6 missile for sea-based terminal, which I'll talk about in just a second. I want to say a little bit about FTM-44, Flight Test Maritime 44, that we conducted last November based on congressional direction to complete that test in 2020. We successfully intercepted a simple rogue state ICBM with the mighty ship USS John Finn, a new construction IEMD destroyer with the SM-3 Block 2A missile. We leveraged the design robustness within Aegis and within SM-3, and what I mean by that is we are outside the requirement space, and we were successful in that mission in a defense of Hawaii scenario. Back to the pandemic, that affected nearly every construction project we had, to include the Aegis Ashore in Poland. But the great news today that I did not report last year is we have all 4 spy arrays now in place in the site. We have the fire control system in place, and this is a forcing function to get us to install and check out of the Aegis weapon system, which we removed from storage. We did all the digital signal checks on it. We are doing hardware upgrades, and that site is on path to complete construction in coordination with the Army Corps. Aegis Sea-Based Terminal Increment 2 is deployed today, and it represents the first regional hypersonic missile defense capability. Increment 3 is underway and delivers in FY24. Now, based on real-world data collection and leveraging the proven Aegis Engage on Remote capabilities, PB22 accelerates our hypersonic missile defense glide phase interceptor, which allows us to intercept prior to terminal. We're evaluating industry proposals now, and we're going to make sure that that design is extensible to land-based batteries. Shifting over to THAAD, Terminal High Altitude Air Defense, we continued our interceptor procurement, our production and training support, developing capabilities to address the evolving threat in very close coordination with the Army. We'll go to the last of the Patriot integration testing this year. Now, for defense of Guam, in PB22, it includes funding for the initial development of a survivable and operationally effective IEMD, Integrated Air and Missile Defense, leveraging mature regional systems. I had a conversation with Admiral Aquilino last night, and his requirements are clear. Defend the people, defend the forces, and do it on a near-term timeline. He is system agnostic, but when you look at the ballistic, the hypersonic, and the cruise missile threats, it drives you to mature proven systems integrated with the joint force and operational in the near term. So in coordination with Indo-PACOM and CAPE, the technical merits of proven regional systems will point to the architecture for our PB22 investments. So I'll wrap up by saying space, land, and sea-based sensors, along with the networked weapons integrated through C2BMC that will tie to JADC2, set the stage for hypersonic and cruise missile defense capabilities. Thank you. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Vice Admiral. You covered a lot of territory there. There's even more in your testimony. Lieutenant General Karbler.
Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm honored to testify before you today. Thank you, especially during the unprecedented health crisis of this past year, for supporting our service members, civilians, contractors, and their families, and your continued support to space and air and missile defense. I'm here today as the commander of the Joint Functional Component Command for Integrated Missile Defense and as the Army's proponent for air and missile defense forces and capabilities. I am responsible for providing General VanHerck the soldiers who stand ready to defend our nation from an intercontinental ballistic missile attack, as well as the soldiers who provide critical missile warning to Army and joint warfighters. As air and missile threats become more diverse and numerous from adversaries worldwide, the Army Air and Missile Defense Enterprise continues to work hard to ensure that our warfighters and our homeland are protected. I would like to take this opportunity to briefly thank and highlight the mission accomplishments of our team of nearly 3,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Guardians, and civilians in this challenging COVID environment that we continue to endure. During this past year, in support of STRATCOM, SpaceCom, and NORAD Northcom, these outstanding men and women provided the Army and Joint Force with satellite communications, space situational awareness and missile warning and defense, and protected our homeland 24/7, 365 from ballistic missile attack. Even in the pandemic environment, they did not miss a beat. To outline one of numerous examples of putting mission first and how Army families have sacrificed during the pandemic, members of our ground-based missile defense crews adhered to 12 consecutive months of stringent measures ensuring the uninterrupted execution of their mission, including sequestering crew members from their homes and families. Essentially, Our missile defense crews lived in a bubble throughout their operational rotations on this essential no-fail mission. While they and their families reside in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and Fort Greely, Alaska, the crew members were basically deployed away from their families for extended periods of time. A positive I've drawn from this pandemic is my daily realization that I've never been more proud and thankful of our greatest asset, our people. Every day, I am awed by their dedication and unwavering sacrifices to our nation. I consider it an honor and a privilege to lead and serve alongside them. The continued support of Congress is critical to our ability to recruit, develop, retain, and resource such a highly qualified and mission-ready team. I look forward to addressing your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Lieutenant General Shaw.
Okay, that better? All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Chairman Cooper, Ranking Member Turner, and members of the House Armed Services Committee Subcommittee on Strategic Forces for the invitation to join my fellow witnesses today in discussing critical national security issues. I am pleased to speak today on behalf of our Commander, General Dickinson, and the 18,000 military, civilian, and contractor members directly engaged in and supporting the missions of United States Space Command. As directed in the Unified Command Plan, one of those missions, as the nation's global sensor manager, requires us to, quote, plan, manage, and execute assigned Department of Defense space situational awareness, missile defense, and missile warning sensors, unquote. I'm pleased to offer you the United States Space Command's perspective on that slice of our mission set. And I look forward to a discussion on how, within the context of DoD's overarching national security strategy, our global sensor manager activities complement those of NORAD, Northern Command, the Missile Defense Agency, and the Space and Missile Defense Command in accomplishment of their respective missions. The Unified Command Plan outlines U.S. Space Command's tasks as a supported combatant command in a newly declared warfighting domain with a clearly defined, if rather large, area of operations. It also outlines a series of supporting tasks through which U.S. Space Command enhances the mission effectiveness of our fellow warfighting combatant commands. It is in our global sensor manager role that you see one of the best examples of the confluence of our supported and supporting roles. Within the third of General Dickinson's key 5 tasks for the command, which is maintaining key relationships, exists the subtask of enhancing interoperability. Our success at the strategic level in building the key relationships necessary for protection of the homeland depends on integrating weapon system operations at the tactical level. That is why U.S. Space Command works so closely with NORTHCOM, STRATCOM, MDA, and SMDC, among many others, to provide missile warning and missile defense capabilities while simultaneously and seamlessly accomplishing our space domain awareness missions. It's an example of the classic aphorism that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The ability to find synergies among these seemingly disparate missions, functions, and systems employed by distinct and separate combatant commands will significantly enhance our effectiveness in protecting and defending the United States and our allies. I look forward to your questions on this and other examples of the coordination and collaboration among the agencies represented here this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, General. We'll now have member questioning, and I'm going to defer my questions for the closed session. Mr. Turner is now recognized.
Great, thank you. Admiral, I'll start with you. Continuing resolutions, they impact missile defense, or any program that's based on ingenuity and new starts, and our nuclear modernization programs, I believe, more than even just basic continuing operations. Could you please describe some of the situations that you're placed in with continuing resolutions and its effects on your programs?
Thanks for the question, Congressman Turner. it's got a broad impact across the program. And let me just kind of start where it really matters. When you get out to the fleet and you look for supports to get the ships underway, right? We'll have to work very closely with the Navy. If we try to execute a flight test, we'll often find that the test ranges are suffering from the same continuous resolution, and everyone will have different budget cycles. So execution of tests is at risk. When you back
Okay,
up
could
to
you
production-
explain why a test gets impacted more than just the general operations of a facility?
Yeah, so if you look at the way we fund our warfare centers, for example, on the Navy side, and the way the ranges are funded, they'll come to an all-stop with a continuing resolution. So we can get a ship out on station, an operational ship there, but we will not have the test support to do that. We can't get the sensors underway. We can't deploy the aircraft that are going to collect data. So that's a clear impact.
So frequently, you can be under a continuing resolution for a quarter of the year.
Sure.
So for 3 months out of the year, your schedules are set back, your work product is set back.
It will, and we'll do our best to catch up on schedules and deconflict and reschedule where we can, but it's a significant impact when it comes there. Then if you back up even further to, say, production, normally we'll be okay. We can carry production for some period of time. But if we start, holding up payments to the contractor, you won't see us proceed in those areas. So there could be a shortened gap there, or something that cascades to the right, and that really translates to cost, right? So when you back up to development, now it comes to the stability of the team, right? So just looking at the government team, it casts a shadow, right, on the future of their careers, and oftentimes we find ourselves losing talent during that sort of phase. And then if you go again to warfare centers and government labs that are on reimbursable funding and those sorts of things, we put them at an all-stop and freeze them.
Does it affect cost and time delivery?
Absolutely. It'll always have an effect on cost and time delivery.
General Karbler, examples, ways in which continuing resolutions affect your operations?
So much like what Admiral Hill just talked about, we run the Reagan test site. So again, it affects our ability to support those tests that we do for the DoD out of the Reagan test site in Kwajalein Atoll.
General VanHerck, General Shaw, this is your chance at a commercial. Any anecdotal stories you want to provide? Any information as to how you've seen continuing resolutions be detrimental?
It's about predictability, Congressman, and being able to move forward based on a plan to execute it strategically. For me, directly in defending Homeland Defense, I'll be able to continue that mission. The most direct impact, and as you heard in my opening statement, is keeping pace with potential threats and adversaries. And the programs that Admiral Hill and General Karbler talked about, if we further continue to delay those, the risk is we fall further behind in defending the Homeland. Thank you.
Congressman, I would just echo what General VanHerck said, that combatant commands are demand capability as soon as they can possibly get it. And any continuing resolution that delays that capability, whether it's testing or fielding or development, is a delay in our ability to sustain readiness against an adversary.
Ms. Tomero, in the 2017 NDAA, fiscal year 2017 NDAA, the Secretary of Defense was required to designate a single entity as a lead acquisition organization for defending the homeland. I'm going to ask you this question in the general. You are in the unique position of playing catch with yourself. There's a bunch of things that happened while you were here that you now have over at the Pentagon, things that need to be completed that are not, that you even had a significant interest in occurring. What are some of the priorities that you have to make certain that the Pentagon finishes and gets over to Congress things that you work to compel them to do?
Ranking Member Turner, thank you. Yes, it's an honor to catch. Sorry, it's an honor to catch those congressional requirements now in my new position. With regard to designating the single authority for cruise missile defense of the homeland, that is something that the administration is going to look at. My understanding is that the previous administration looked at it and decided not to designate a single authority. We do understand that there are capability gaps. We need to look at where and how to prioritize cruise missile defense of the homeland. There are cost issues. I know the Congressional Budget Office identified significant cost ranging from $75 billion to $180 billion over 20 years. So that would include acquisition, also operationalization of the system, maintenance over the long term. But I think what we need to look at is what is the viability of our capabilities, what are the costs, and how do we prioritize that defense?
I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Langevin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay? Very good.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for your testimony today. In particular, I want to welcome back and welcome to the committee Ms. Tomero and Leonor. I enjoyed your work on the committee when we worked together, and it's really a big loss to the committee when you left, but the department's gain, and I wish you well. I want to thank everyone for your service to our nation. I want to begin on a directed energy question. I have to say I'm really disappointed that the president's budget canceled MDA's directed energy program. This program provides promising ballistic missile defense technology, and it really addresses cost imbalances between offense and defense. Admiral Hill, who made the decision to cut the program and why?
Congressman Langerman, thanks very much. Great question. I would say it was a department effort to consolidate directed energy work within the department, and so I will, work closely with the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, and when these capabilities reach the power levels and the sizing and levels that we need, beam control, stability, lethality capability, then we will adopt those technologies and bring them into the missile defense system.
Okay, I'm unclear. Was the decision made or recommended under this administration or the previous administration?
It was prior administration. Yes, sir.
I see. Thank you. How much transparency and input will you have into this new arrangement to ensure the technology fits missile defense requirements?
Yes, sir. Thank you. I think it's on us to ensure that we stay close to the Undersecretary's lead for directed energy so that we can influence the requirements, so they understand what our power requirements are, what our concept of operations are, how we would leverage that technology. I don't see that that's an issue in terms of having access and transparency into the roadmaps that lead to those capabilities going to industry.
Okay. Is my understanding that you'd have very little transparency into the funding, though?
That is true. I don't have a good look into the funding. All I know is that the funding was removed from the missile defense budget.
Okay. So I just want to say I think that that decision from the last administration should be reevaluated. That's my assessment. If you move these programs out of your agency, I believe that we're going to keep them in the labs, the technology in the labs, to test them to death, and they'll never get to the warfighter. At best, it's wasted money. At worst, our systems can't keep up with what adversaries are developing. So the decision also cut the diode-pumped alkaline laser program, and I'm concerned about that. But let me get to something else in another area. So our adversaries build electronic warfare systems that are specifically targeted to undermine our technological command and control advantages, especially overseas. General Karbler and Admiral Hill, how effective is our missile defense network in a contested spectrum environment, and what improvements do we need to make?
Thanks, Congressman. So every day within our missile defense systems that we have, we got to practice. We got to have cyber protection, and we have resiliency of the ballistic missile defense system. We collect, analyze, and report digital data. We deploy and maintain our network defense tools. We're constantly evaluating our network defense operations, and then we respond to incidents, and we work very closely with the Missile Defense Agency as any of those potential incidents come up.
Yes, sir. And then
Thank you.
From my perspective, working closely with the combatant commands and with the operational forces and the services, because all of the, when you look at the missile defense system writ large, it cuts across all of the above. And so we have to do a lot of coordination there. But we are doing the overall, insider work. We're doing the adversarial assessments. We are just now starting to work with DOT&E to do something called persistent cyber operations, where we'll be 24/7 monitoring and healing the networks as we go. For me, I want to know where vulnerabilities are, so it becomes a very sensitive topic right away. But we've got great relationships with U.S. Cybercom, with Strategic Command's cyber group, and of course DOT&E. So I think we're in a much better place. If you'd asked me this question about 3 years or so ago, we were learning how to crawl. We're definitely walking very fast right now and almost about ready to run as we go into persistent cyber operations.
The gentleman's.
Thank you. I know my time's expired. I have some questions to submit for the record, and I appreciate you responding. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for being here today and your service for our country. And Ms. Secretary Tomero, Israeli families face the threat of larger and more sophisticated rocket and missile arsenals every day provided by Iran to Hamas and Hezbollah. To address this mounting threat, Israel and the United States are working together to develop and deploy a multi-tiered missile defense system. The U.S.-Israel Memorandum of Understanding on Security Assistance provides for $500 million in funding for annual missile defense cooperation with Israel. Do you support the continued funding for the joint U.S.-Israel missile defense programs, including Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow? And can you speak on the progress of the development of Arrow 4?
Congressman, thank you very much for that question. Yes, there's strong support for continuing those programs. They've had a record of success over a long time, and we continue our very close collaboration and cooperation with Israel. I think on the details of the development of Arrow, I'd like to defer to Vice Admiral Hill.
Sir, Arrow 4 is going very well in terms of laying down the requirements for that system. In fact, as soon as the COVID-19 restrictions lifted, we had a team on site working very closely with IMDO to lay out requirements and to lay down the development path. So I think we're in a good place with Arrow 4.
Thank you very much. And Secretary Tomero, another country that is under threat, an inventory of short-range missiles will provide and improve Taiwan's ability to deter Chinese aggression by credibly disrupting, degrading, and interdicting Chinese command and control nodes, military airfields, supply depots, and reinforcements in response to an attack. Does the administration support Taiwan's ability to defend itself through layered deterrence by including enhanced missile capability?
Congressman, we strongly support deterrence and are investing in capabilities to deter a Chinese attack in the area.
Hey, thank you very much. And additionally, General Karbler, I'm grateful that the support which is provided for funding Israel's combat-proven Iron Dome system in the FY22 budget requests. The Army has purchased 2 Iron Dome batteries and has been reported the Department is considering purchasing more. Has the Army determined where and when the batteries will be deployed? Is the Army not considering purchasing more batteries? Which parts of the system can be incorporated as part of an indirect fire force protection capability?
Yes, sir. I had a chance to go visit the Iron Dome, the U.S. Army soldiers who are on the 2 batteries worth of Iron Dome equipment up at White Sands Missile Range. So I visited them a couple of months ago as they go through their training. At the end of this month, we'll see a Iron Dome live fire executed by those soldiers, and they'll wrap up their field training exercises and certifications with the goal that the first battery will be ready for worldwide deployment by September of this year, and then the second battery shortly thereafter. Discussions about future employment, I'd like to take that into the closed session if I could.
Absolutely, but gosh, that's very encouraging. And Admiral Hill, the valued American territory of Guam is a key Western Pacific theater operations logistical hub for our Navy, making a priority target for the Chinese Communist Party. The Missile Defense Agency's FY22 request includes $118.3 million to develop an architecture for defense of Guam. Your agency has not yet actually detailed what type of system this would be. Given China's increasing hostile pressure and the largest peacetime military buildup in the history of the world, when can we expect to have a detailed overview of the system and its deployment timeline?
Thanks, Congressman Wilson. We're working that very actively last night. I mentioned in my opening comments discussing this with Admiral Aquilina last night. You'll see those details when we deliver the report to Congress. We're on path to deliver that from MDA to the Cape and have a discussion with Indo-PACOM within the next couple weeks. I think we had promised June, but given the complexity of it, it's going to take us a little bit longer to get there, but we will definitely outline with the detail based on the threat set, which is ballistic, cruise, and hypersonic. We're going to leverage mature systems, and we're going to procure those areas that we need for long lead in order to hit the timeline. It's a very aggressive timeline given where we're at.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Moulton.
Thank you, Chairman. Threat detection and reaction time are clearly key to effective missile defense, and both of those depend on software. But it seems that our current system of acquisition is designed to keep us a step behind because we lock into contracts with a single company or single consortium for years at a time, assuming that that company has the ability or incentive to update the software on the system at the speed of relevance, which often they don't. The world has long since become software-centric, but DoD is still stuck on hardware-determined development. So, Vice Admiral Hill, what is your organization doing to make sure that your system's software can be upgraded regularly, will be upgraded regularly? Because I struggle to imagine an area where it would be more important to have the fastest and most accurate software running our defenses.
Thank you, sir. Great question. And I'll just highlight two programs and give you some hints in some other areas. We have adopted agile software processes across nearly every program within the Missile Defense Agency in coordination with the services. So we've got very strong linkages with the Navy on Aegis, for example. When you look at the command and control battle management, which is that hardened network that brings everything together, that is our all-domain networking that will be tied to JADC2 downstream. That is in a spiral upgrade. That program, early on, we recognized because of the numbers of sensors that change, the weapons that change along the way, that one has to be a spiral and in constant evolution. That's another great example of very agile, quick software turns and delivery to the combatant command, because that happens to be where the warfighter touches the system through C2BMC. And then the last thing I'll mention is on the new contracts for Next Generation Interceptor. It's actually written into the contract, and the program offices, two of them, because we have a competition here, are definitely tied into DevSecOps, the Agile framework, and using digital engineering. That's a whole new thing. We've got the latest and greatest tools to go execute that, and that will become really the standard that we use across the agency.
Vice Admiral Hill, if 10 years from now, within the missile's lifetime, a different company has better software, or you simply have a company outside the consortium who has a better discriminating radar or some component like that, do you have the ability to go outside and pick this component to add to the missile system?
Absolutely, we do. And so by having modularity as a requirement in NGI, for example, that gives us the ability to go to those third parties, those innovation sites. In fact, I'm going to visit the United States Navy's Forge new establishment that they have now for the Aegis system. And we're going to talk about modularity and the complexities of bringing in innovation and the third parties. I'm not quite sold that we can do that right yet, but we're having very close conversations on incorporating exactly what you're talking about. How do we bring in the small business? How do we bring in different thinking? Now you have to have a structure to that, but we're working our way through that.
Okay. Vice Admiral Hill, you've said we rely on nuclear deterrence to address more complex threats, to include near-peer hypersonic missiles. But I'm concerned we do not have a vision for managing this emerging threat that does not potentially increase the risk of a nuclear response. So far, I've asked this question a couple times and have yet to receive a satisfactory answer on what the department's vision is for how we approach the emerging threat from hypersonic missiles or pursue our own hypersonic capabilities in a way that deters rather than destabilizes. So, Vice Admiral Hill, is deterrence still sufficient in the face of this evolving capability?
Congressman, I think policy would be better to answer that. I will tell you, for hypersonic missile defense, we are targeting the regional threat. But I'll turn it over to Ms. Tomero to talk to you about the overall policy.
Great, thank you. Ms. Tomero?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, this is something that we're going to take a close look at as part of the missile defense review, the nuclear posture review, and as they feed into looking at a more integrated approach to deterrence, looking at the threats across domains and looking at the risk of escalation. So the challenge you alluded to is one of the...
Look, Mr. Merritt, look, I understand that this did not originate with this administration. That is the last administration that has failed to develop any strategy here. But let me just point out how insane it is to be pouring billions of dollars into an advanced weapon system that we don't know how we're going to use, and worse, might actually make deterrence worse. So this has got to be an absolute top priority. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Hill, I'm wanting to talk to you about the 44 deployed ground-based interceptors. And is there a point over the next few years in which we will be dipping below that number?
Congressman Lamborn, thank you. Great question. When we had this conversation about a year or so ago, we saw reliability, falling off a lot earlier than what I actually believe it will fall off to, and that's mostly because of the support from Congress and the Service Life Extension Program. So our ability to take those oldest rounds out of the ground, there's three classes of GBI. The oldest ones have never been de-emplaced, and so by taking them out, replacing the boosters, fixing one-shot devices, upgrading the processors, updating the threat libraries, that raises the capability from what we have today. So in addition to keeping the number, we're now going to increase the capacity because the capability goes up. And that is something that Northcom can then consider as they look at assessing their shot doctrine. So the SLEP program, very important. If you were to ask me about that timeline to get to NGI, the criticality of that reliability program, can't be stated more strongly than the fact that we've got to do that work so that we're hardware-based and we really know, as opposed to the analysis that we showed you last year, which was based purely on analysis. Now we have hardware by which to do that, and we have some number of those that we've removed already to do that replacement. So there's some period of time where we will have a little bit of a dip, but we'll coordinate that with Northcom before we do that. But again, capability being increased is the offset.
Okay, thank you. And I want to follow up briefly on something my friend and colleague James Langevin brought up, and that is funding for directed energy. Apparently, there will still be money on this research and development in other parts of DoD. It's just the MDA segment that is being cut for this year. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So, because I'm so focused on this mission, which is very discrete and has a totally unique requirement on how we would leverage directed energy, it just means I have to change the way I do business, right? So rather than direct funding and transitioning to industry, I'll rely on the Undersecretary's office to do that for me. And then I'm working very closely with the services. One example would be that when the Navy deploys its base defense of a lower power directed energy, we can take that and use that once it matures and raise the power even more to go do the ballistic missile defense mission. So it just changes the way we do business.
Okay, thank you. That is reassuring, and compared to how it first appeared. Sure. And then second, along that line, just a comment I'll make, not a question, and that is we'll continue to work on cooperative programs with the State of Israel on joint research and development of directed energy in the missile defense, especially short-range missiles and rockets. Ms. Tomero, I'd like to ask you a question. It's great to have you in on that side instead of this side of the chairs here. But now that the new administration is working on a nuclear posture review, do you anticipate any changes of policy pursuant to the results of that review when that comes out compared to the last administration?
I think there'll be continuity in certain areas, change in other areas, and we're about to start the posture review in a couple of weeks, and so that'll be, the analysis and reviews will be performed over the summer. And so what I could tell you is that we are going to look at where there might be some change, but that will be underpinned by analysis and thorough reviews.
Okay, I'll be watching that with keen interest. Hopefully more continuity than disruption and change. And lastly, General VanHerck, you have previously testified that with regard to the current North Korean ICBM capabilities, you are comfortable with our present missile defense capabilities. A little glitch there. But please add time back to my clock. But in your best judgment, do you still agree with the assessment that the North Korean threat will begin pacing our homeland defenses starting in 2025, and so we'll need to supplement or enhance the current GMD system to maintain parity, or overmatch, actually?
Congressman, I believe we should talk about that in a classified forum. I tell you, I'm comfortable with the programs that we have in place right now for next generation Interceptor fielding by 2028, with incentives to pull further left, if able, between the two companies that are competing. Happy to discuss further in a classified environment.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for their expertise, their time, and certainly their service to the country. I had a couple of just brief questions, if I can, for General VanHerck. By the way, thank you, General, for engaging. I appreciated our offline conversation a great deal yesterday. I was reflecting on it, and I think you and I were talking about the nature of conflict having become a global engagement, and I think I was commenting, as I'm new to this committee, about sort of the combatant commands being more regional in nature, and we were having this conversation as I was reflecting, and I wondered if I could ask you to just talk a little bit more about the nature of it, and how it has really become a global engagement. I know our combatant commands are structured regionally, but could you talk a little bit more about how you see it, and specifically how having domain awareness is a critical element to the success of that global engagement, and then a little bit maybe about the challenges potentially that it poses for you?
Congressman, absolutely. So in today's global environment, what you see is all problems, for the most part, especially with Russia or China, but even with the invention of the internet and non-kinetic capabilities, even rogue state actors or even non-state actors have the potential to have global influence through their activities, both in day-to-day competition and in crisis. My homeland defense design doesn't start with defending the homeland inside the borders of North America or the United States. It actually starts from a global perspective, relying on my fellow combatant commanders, other nations such as NATO nations, and our allies and partners around the globe to have domain awareness. They have sensors and capabilities, and if we share information from undersea to on orbit, to include human information to give us a global picture, we'll be in a much better position. So our homeland defense design focuses that way. I hope that helps clarify.
Yeah, and I just, any challenges that poses, or do you feel as though the design is sufficient, there's enough situational awareness that the regional combatant command approach can sufficiently meet those global challenges?
Congressman, from a domain awareness perspective, I still see challenges. That's why you'll see in my unfunded priority list after we saw the FY22 budget is for the top of it is over-the-horizon radar capabilities to give us that global domain awareness. The competitors have extended their range to be able to hold our homeland at risk. In addition to that, you see Arctic communications on my unfunded priority list, which gives us the ability to share data globally and to operate in the Arctic. The same thing as Ranking Member Turner mentioned, is the elevated radar as well here is an unfunded priority to give domain awareness against potential cruise missiles. And finally, over-the-horizon polar radar capabilities. So I think there's room to grow. I'm encouraged by the budget for ballistic missile defense. I think we have room to grow cruise missile defense, domain awareness. I'm also encouraged with what the Navy did with regards to undersea domain awareness with almost $1 billion in their undersea domain awareness.
In just a little more than a minute that I have, General, we talk quite a bit about ballistic missile threats. Can you talk to me a little bit more about cruise missile threats? And has that changed over the last few decades? And is there anything we should be concerned about, anything that you're concerned about?
Congressman, absolutely. Russia has developed the capability through long-range cruise missiles that provide a very low radar cross-section that are incredibly challenging to detect to our legacy North Warning System and to our platforms that exist today. That's why, again, domain awareness is a priority for me, to give us that longer range ability to detect that. In the not too distant future, 5 to 10 years, China will be in the same position. Russia has developed capabilities from undersea with their advanced, very quiet, nearly on par with our submarines, to field that capability, and their bombers to include polar over-the-horizon capabilities and also surface vessels. So I'm very concerned about the cruise missile defense of the Homeland, and something we could talk more about in the classified session.
Terrific. Well, I appreciate very much your insights, and Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to offer those questions. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
Thanks. The gentleman is down to the final second. Congratulations. Mr. Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Vice Admiral Hill, the Missile Defense Agency will be undertaking a new major development effort with the Next Generation Interceptor program while concurrently restructuring the existing ground-based interceptor program, going from a single contract to multiple contracts. What assurances can you give this committee that the MDA's approaching this program transition in a way that reduces risk while continuing to meet or exceed the current schedule?
Thanks, Congressman Brooks. We did a top-down, bottoms-up restructuring of Missile Defense Agency writ large at the beginning of 2020. And a lot of folks call it MDA 2.0. And what we mean by that is when we stood up the two contracts, as we prepared to make that award, we had to start early on constructing two separate program offices with the right certified board leaders that were going to be in charge of that, put all the conflict of interest issues on the table, make sure we had all the firewalls up. We brought in a technical direction agent, new for the GMD program, so that we can leverage the UARCs and FFRDCs, bring in that additional talent coming in. I mentioned before that we're moving to digital engineering and DevSecOps. We are, that program to me is a model program within the Department of Defense in terms of how we're doing business. Two contracts, competing, pressure on industry, reducing risks. We're seeing IRAD investments being made in the critical areas that we were concerned about when we were dealing with the RKV program. So I think we've got it right. Plus, we've got a great set of operational need statements coming from the Combatant Command. We've got a strong set of requirements that were endorsed by the JROC. This is a new and different next generation interceptor, and I think we're poised to take it on. We've got the right professional team in place.
Another question, unrelated to the previous one. China is rapidly developing multiple hypersonic weapon systems. America is developing hypersonic missile defense programs at the speed of relevance is necessary to deter Chinese aggression and defend against future attacks. The Missile Defense Agency's unfunded priority list for fiscal year 2022 includes a request for additional funding for hypersonic missile defense efforts. Will you please share with this committee how the requested funding would accelerate development of this capability?
Yes, sir. And if we were to rewind and go to last year, we were focused on the science and technology of operating in that very unique environment of the glide phase. But after viewing many of those real-world flight events to include, actual U.S. test events, we were able to show that with our models of the systems, which are very high fidelity, that we can in fact close the fire control loop. And so one of the reasons we are focused right now on the Aegis capability with its proven engage on remote capability is the fact that we can track in glide phase. We can have a ship upstream before you ever get the space constellation in place, pass that data to a ship and close the fire control loop. So what's missing in that equation is the Interceptor. And so we put out a broad area announcement earlier this year, and then in PB22 you see an acceleration of that program. So moving away from an S&T program that was focused in on the mid-30s to a program that's focused on this decade. And so that's what we're doing. So when you look at the plus-up area, that will continue some of the parallel work to reduce risk in that program.
Can you update the committee on the status of the hypersonic and ballistic tracking space sensor capability, which is absolutely necessary for tracking hypersonic missile threats from launch and throughout the missile's flight?
Yes, sir. Thank you for asking about HBTSS, Hypersonic Ballistic Tracking Space Sensor. So as you know, we took a very measured approach to this. We started with a number of companies in the concept of development. Then we necked down to 4 companies that we put through what we call a clutter management demo, which meant we're coming from space, looking down on a warm Earth at warm targets, and could we develop the algorithms to extract those targets out of that scene? And we were very successful on the ground. So where we are now is we've down selected to 2 contractors. So we have a competitive approach again. So two companies in NGI, we've got 2 companies on the Glide Phase Interceptor program, and we have 2 companies on HBTSS. That competitive pressure, and we're going to put 2 of those up in orbit in FY23, 2 different companies with the requirement to be interoperable, and we're going to connect them to our flight tests in the Indo-PACOM region. So HBTSS on path to get to demo on orbit in FY23.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see I only have a few seconds left, so I'll yield back.
We appreciate the extra 16 seconds there. Mr. Horsford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for testifying today. It's really great to have your expertise and insight. It's been very informative. Vice Admiral Hill, in March of 2018, General Hyten testified to the Senate Armed Services Committee. And when it comes to hypersonic weapons, specifically China's DF-17 hypersonic boost glide vehicle, quote, "We don't have any defense that would deny the employment of such a weapon against us." Last week, you testified to the same committee that the Aegis Sea Base Terminal is, quote, "the first regional hypersonic..."
Okay, yeah, just mute yourself. They can hear you right now.
We can hear you.
Okay. Last week, you testified to the same committee that the Aegis Sea Base Terminal is, quote, "the first regional hypersonic missile defense capability that is deployed with the aircraft carrier strike groups today. And it's important that we have that capability now because the hypersonic threat is there now." So my understanding is that last operational test of the Aegis system and the SM-3 Block 2A Interceptor was conducted in November 2020 against a simple ballistic ICBM threat during FTM-44. So I'm curious if any additional advancements have been made since General Hyten's 2018 testimony that have changed the DoD's assessment of the effectiveness of Aegis against the hypersonic threat.
Okay, Congressman, thank you. So I'm going to separate 2 things for you. FTM-44 with an SM-3 is a mid-course engagement of a ballistic missile. So that's separate and distinct. When I say Sea Base Terminal, that is leveraging the SM-6 missile down in the atmosphere where it is maneuvering and going after a high-value unit. And I think that's what your question's really centered on. We are on what we call Increment 2 today with a upgraded version of SM-6, and we're testing that over the course of the next year. Increment 3 will bring in a broader set of those threats. So it was a true statement last year because what we were really designing against in the early increments was against the maneuvering threat, but it was still pretty much a ballistic missile. But when you actually take a look at the maneuver space of where we are today and with the Increment 2 capability, that is a hypersonic threat because it is maneuvering at very high Gs and it's going at a very high speed. So we're building upon that. That is that first layer. And when I talk about a glide phase interceptor, that is the layered defense to where we go after it earlier in the trajectory before it comes down into the atmosphere and becomes the maneuvering problem. Does that make sense?
So is a mission-capable kill vehicle for currently fielded hypersonic weapons, is the Interceptor capable of performing this function?
It is capable of performing that function in the atmosphere against a series of threats, and its limit would be the airframe, which I can't talk about today.
Thank you. And a question for Ms. Tomero. Other than the deployed Aegis systems, how are we currently defending against or mitigating the hypersonic threat for our forces deployed in the Indo-Pacific?
Congressman, so we are, as mentioned, focusing the priority for hypersonic defense as a regional threat. We're also looking at increasing the defense of Guam as well in the context of a conflict in the Indo-Pacific. And so those are all capabilities that are being further studied and looked at both from the Missile Defense Agency and also with the Office of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation. And so increasing those investments and prioritizing capabilities will feed into the FY23 budget request.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I have a few other questions that I will ask, take offline in initial proceeding.
I thank the gentleman. He's given me back 19 seconds. Very grateful. Mr. Desjardins.
I'll try to do a little better because a lot of my questions have already been answered, and General VanHerck, I think your opening statement laid out a lot of those. It's clear that the Homeland Defense is bearing the brunt of real dollar defense cuts, and that's going to require to allocate some risk. So just briefly, General VanHerck and then Vice Admiral Hill, if you don't mind, can you each provide an assessment of the threat posed by our adversaries to Homeland below the nuclear threshold, things like the Colonial Pipeline cyber attack, and then how comfortable are you with the current defense capabilities to address these threats?
Congressman, thank you for that. First of all, I believe the foundation of Homeland Defense is the nuclear deterrent. But right now, what you see is after 3 decades of watching the way we project power forward, Russia and China specifically are developing capabilities to hold the homeland at risk below the nuclear threshold. Those capabilities would include very quiet submarines. They just fielded, Russia just fielded their second SEV-class submarine, which is on par with ours. Within a 5-year period or so, they'll have 8 to 9 of those submarines, which will be a persistent proximate threat off of our east and west coast that we haven't had ever in the past. China will be about a decade behind. Russia has upgraded all their bombers to include their nuclear bombers and nuclear capabilities. Russia has fielded already hypersonic glide vehicles launched off of ICBM capabilities to hold the homeland at risk. With regards to non-kinetic capabilities, I think if you just look at recent history, that you'll see that there are significant vulnerabilities in the non-kinetic, especially cyber, that we need to take a look at and probably look at more broadly at policy across the board and make sure that we're as efficient, effective with the limited resources we have for cyber defense, which includes Homeland Security as well as DOD. I hope that clarifies that.
That does. Thank you. Admiral Hill, do you have anything to add to that?
What I'll do is I'll just go down to the specifics of ballistic missile defense. I would say what's changed over the last couple of years, and you can read about it in the white press, you look at some of those launches that occurred back in 2018, dogleg maneuvers, right, just right off the bat, maneuvering in space, what I call range extensions. They're all hypersonic when they come back into the atmosphere. So what used to be a very predictable ballistic profile, that has now changed, and it's a challenge to the sensor architecture. It goes back to General VanHerck's comment about all-domain awareness. It becomes very important that we continue to invest in the sensor capacity that we have against ballistic, hypersonic, and cruise, because they are converging, and they're coming at us across that whole integrated air missile defense domain.
All right, thank you. And Chairman, I think that's like real time there. I yield back.
Well, Mr. Desjardins, the prize winner, 2 minutes returned. We're grateful. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really a very important hearing. Thank you, gentlemen and lady, for participating today. I'm going to take this in a slightly different way. I've been on this committee 10 years now, and we've spent billions upon billions trying to create a defense. And it seems the faster we go, the behinder we get. General VanHerck, you just mentioned getting behind on submarines, getting behind on hypersonic missiles, getting behind on intercontinental ballistic missiles, ground-based missile defense, and so forth. The President is going to be in Geneva tomorrow to talk to Putin. Should he be talking about arms control in the domain in which you are operating? Ms. Tomero first.
Chairman Garamendi, yes, that we anticipate that there will be a focus on the need for increased strategic stability and building on the progress of arms control and building on the foundation of extending New START. And so within the Department of Defense, that'll be part of the look at integrated deterrence, having arms control as part of that, but also, again, looking at across domains and the risk of escalation across domains, including nuclear.
So the quick answer is yes. With regard to each of you, Mr. General, Admiral, General, what would be the first thing you'd want discussed in an arms control negotiation?
Congressman, first of all, I think that any arms control discussion these days should not be unilaterally with a single country, with the two peer competitors that we have. And it would be nice to have that discussion with both Russia and China. I do believe there's opportunities to discuss arms, including non-kinetic, such as cyber and space, where we can establish lanes in the road, where I'm very concerned about unintentional escalation in those areas. Ideally, I would love to get rid of all nuclear weapons. That genie's out of the bottle, and I don't think we can. So there ought to be a discussion on strategic stability with the three nations that we're talking about with regards to nuclear weapons, with regards to hypersonic capabilities, with regards to space capabilities as well. I'll defer to give them some more time.
And Congressman, I'm not a policy person, so it's probably just not appropriate for me. But as a technical geek, I will tell you that the reality is the threat does evolve. It becomes more complex. And we're going to have to make a decision on whether or not we want to deal with that.
You know I'm not going to let you off the hook that easy, but let's move on. Mr. Karbler.
Congressman, again, I'm not a policy expert. I'm an air and missile defense officer, and so...
Wait. The four of you know more about this than most anybody else. So I understand you're not policy. My question is, what would you want to be discussed?
Any discussion on arms control, we got to make sure that the parties that participate, whatever's agreed to would be verifiable by both countries or whatever countries are parties to that.
Trust but verify. I've heard that before, and that's worked it before. General Shaw.
Congressman, so the space domain is it's not a global common, it's an exoglobal common. And so I would echo what General VanHerck said, that whenever you talk about something in the space domain, you have to involve all the parties that are participant in that. So it would have to be multilateral. I would think the first thing I would want to look at the space domain is norms of responsible behavior within that domain. Expectations of what is professional behavior versus non-professional behavior, things that would help us to avoid escalation in that domain that could lead to a crisis globally.
I think Putin has put that on the table already, and two of the four have already said that would be a good starting point. I appreciate your comments on this. Admiral Hill, you know I'm coming back at you and going to get into detail, and General Karbler the same. While you say you're not policy, there's nobody around that knows more about policy than the two of you, or the four of you, five of you. Thank you very much. I'll yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Waltz, they've called votes, so we're going to have 4 people remaining. We are going to end this public hearing in about 10 minutes, so the shorter you are, the more...
I'll be quick.
Good.
I'll be quick. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General VanHerck, I just wanted to commend NORTHCOM for its Arctic strategy, which it was pretty comprehensive, called for developing strategic partnerships in the region, enhancing Arctic operations, capabilities, infrastructure, and a credible defense presence. I noticed in your Senate testimony in response to Senator Sullivan's question where the various services were implementing their respective Arctic strategies as part of the president's budget. Your response was, we didn't move the ball very far this year in the budget with regards to resources in the Arctic. Can you flesh that out? What capabilities, what infrastructure would you like to see prioritized by the Congress that went unfunded in the budget?
Congressman, I would point to my unfunded priority list first for domain awareness with over-the-horizon radar capabilities, Arctic communications capabilities, as well as polar over-the-horizon. You mentioned infrastructure. Infrastructure in the Arctic is crucial to be able to project power, not only during conflict or crisis, but to campaign and create deterrence on a day-to-day basis. Additional infrastructure, I think that would be helpful. And when we talk about competing in the Arctic, what I'm talking about is persistence. And to have persistence, you have to have the ability to remain in place. And that would include having a potential port north of Dutch Harbor for vessels to refuel, whether they be Coast Guard or Navy vessels as well. Additionally, some things I think we could do better to compete in the Arctic. I believe in a crisis or conflict with the forces that we have, and we're blessed to have significant forces in the Arctic that are assigned to Indo-PACOM, but in the NORTHCOM AOR, more than 100 fifth-generation fighters. I believe those fighters will likely deploy, especially to a European or a Indo-Pacific crisis. In that situation, I would love to have the ability to have forces that would backfill them that are organized, trained, and equipped to operate in the Arctic. Unfortunately, we don't have that today, and we need to identify some of those forces. I hope that lays out a little bit of the picture.
That does, General. Thank you. And just to be clear, we do not currently have a persistent naval presence or a persistent ground presence facing north in the Arctic. And I think that's something this committee overall should take a hard look at. I just wanted to very quickly follow up. Admiral Hill, what have your conversations been like with your Israeli counterpart with regards to their recent conflict? President Biden's committed to resupplying Israel with Iron Dome interceptors that were expended. Can you give us a status on that?
I can tell you about our input to that. As you know, we've got the partnership co-production on Iron Dome, co-development work that we do with the Aero system and with David Sling. The conversations that we had with IMDO were really to kind of back check, costing of what we developed. So as they put together their submittal for that special appropriation, they kind of wanted to back check on that, and that's just part of our partnership. But it's better for Ms. Tomero to answer the question because it's really within the department now for a decision.
Yeah, that is being considered now, and again, will feed into our reviews.
The president's made the commitment, so I'm curious as to what the holdup is within the department. If it's been costed out, the relationship exists. The commander-in-chief has said we're going to do this. When do we expect this to free from the bowels of OSD?
Again, it's the department is working through it, and we expect that this will be addressed as a high priority. It's being prioritized at the highest levels of the department.
Weeks, months? I don't know when the Israelis can expect another attack.
I'll get back to you with an answer. I don't expect it will be months. Again, it's being prioritized at the highest level, and the department is conducting meetings on it this week as we speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Panetta, this will be the last questioner.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Just quickly, Lieutenant General Shaw, how is Spacecom integrating new roles as the global sensor monitor?
So, Congressman, I think what we are witnessing is a convergence of those mission sets that I mentioned in my opening remarks of space domain awareness, missile defense, and missile warning, meaning that as the the threats diversify, the needs to track those at various stages all start to converge. A ground-launched anti-satellite weapon, an anti-satellite weapon in space, and a hypersonic or hyperglide vehicle, they all start to occupy the same kinds of timelines and needs. And so what we're doing in our role as Global Sensor Manager is finding ways that we can network together sensors against all of those threats at speed.
Great, thank you. And just one final question, so at least Stefan can get a question in there. I see her on the phone. One question, though, to deal with something that's important, near and dear to me, and that's Central Coast, and that's a Navy postgraduate school. How do you think other entities within the DoD enterprise, like Navy postgraduate school, work with Spacecom to develop new space-based educational requirements?
The programs I'm already aware of at NPS are exceptional when it comes to space education. I think we would want to continue to be that part of our educational infrastructure.
Great. So do I. Look forward to working with you. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back.
Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you so much, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Panetta. I just wanted to make sure they knew that I was here on the Republican side. My question is simple. Section 1648 of the FY21 NDAA required a report on a layered Homeland Defense system, which was to be submitted no later than March 1st, 2021. We're obviously past that deadline. The report has yet to be delivered to Congress after numerous delays. Admiral Hill, Congress is still awaiting this report on layered Homeland Missile Defense required by the FY21 NDAA. Has MDA provided all of its input for this report to the Pentagon?
Congressman Stefanik, the answer to that is yes. It's really a policy question. Technically, I see no barriers, but it is a policy question that we need to come through. And
I just wanted to get you on record, Admiral Hill. Ms. Tomero, so we need this report to complete our work for the FY22 NDAA. When will OSD submit this to Congress?
Let me get you a better answer on the timeline, but I can assure you that looking at how what investments we make for layered Homeland Defense, what priorities are made, are the subject of studies again in consultation with the Missile Defense Agency, with the Office of Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, CAPE, and so looking at what the options are, what the costs. Some of it can be scaled, what can feed in to make improvements, and what can be done in terms of cost reduction. And so we've made an initial investment on this in FY21, in FY22. And so those studies are going to inform further investments in FY23. And so we will get you an answer on those studies.
Great. That study it's not optional. That deadline is in law, required by the FY21 NDAA. So I'll expect that answer from you and your office and OSD this week as to when we can expect that. My next question is regarding the threats and how they have intensified. We know, according to open source reporting, that North Korea has capabilities of striking anywhere in the U.S. And there is also open source reporting that Iran and North Korea are working in tandem on missile development. Additionally, open source reporting talks about how the IRGC oversees Iran's civilian space launch program, which has obvious dual use benefits and capabilities. Do you believe that the missile threats to the United States increase during and since the Obama administration? And the reason why I go back to the Obama administration is that administration said that we should build a third continental interceptor site if missile threats to the U.S. increase. So I want to know on record if you believe the threats to the homeland have increased since the Obama administration.
Yes.
That's for Ms. Tomero.
Yes, both North Korea and Iran are continuing to increase their missile capabilities and have increased them since 2010.
And we know that the West Coast has a more robust protection from missile threats from the Pacific. Relative to the West Coast, is the East Coast as protected from threats like a potential Iranian ICBM or an SLBM from somewhere in the Atlantic?
Yes, all of the United States is protected with missile defense today.
Switching gears to the NGI, there are reports that the MDA plans to buy 10 developmental interceptors as part of the NGI program. Would any of those interceptors go anywhere outside of the current GBI silo infrastructure sites at Fort Greely or Vandenberg Air Force Base? Specifically, could any of those interceptors go to an East Coast missile defense site?
I'll defer to Vice Admiral Hill on where interceptors could be placed.
Yeah, ma'am, right now, we're focused on getting to the production numbers and those initial test articles. It'll be a global force management discussion on, anything beyond Fort Greely. But right now, we're planning for Fort Greely. We've got the room there, Missile Field 4. We have all 20 silos installed now. We're doing the integration work, so we can house them in Fort Greely. And if the nation makes the decision to open up battle space by having a third site, that conversation will come.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Kahili is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the Homeland Defense Radar Hawaii. I was disappointed to see that it was zeroed out in the president's budget, a program, a sensor that the previous combatant commander had quoted as saying the best program solution to enable a credible, in-depth, underlayer defense for our forces in Hawaii. You know, in reviewing all the testimony, whether it's the departments, the NORTHCOM commander, the MDA director, we all talk about North Korea, Kim Jong-un, and how increasing that threat is to the United States and the development of their ICBMs and nuclear missiles. So my question is for Ms. Tomero, what is the Department of Defense current plan to protect Hawaii and address the gap in our ability to detect, track, discriminate, and defeat a ballistic missile for Hawaii and for Guam?
Thank you, Congressman. I just want to make clear that Hawaii is currently protected today.
How is Hawaii protected?
It is protected with the current capabilities we have.
What sensor protects Hawaii?
We have SBX.
SBX is in the Northern Pacific. What sensor protects the state of Hawaii from a ballistic missile threat from the DPRK?
Well, we have a network of sensors, including the tracking sensors, OPIR, and then, as I mentioned, we have SBX that it contributes to improved discrimination. So
if we need to use the SBX for Hawaii, then we are unable to use the SBX for the Homeland. Is that correct? For NORTHCOM?
I would defer to Vice Admiral Hill or General VanHerck on the details of the capabilities.
I think the fact is, and I know we need to adjourn, is that we do not have an adequate sensor for the Hawaiian Islands. If we're going to depend on our Aegis systems, that is a capability that Admiral Aguilino cannot use in the Western Pacific. If we're going to depend on SBX, that is a capability that NORTHCOM cannot use to defend the continental United States. And it is why we need a sensor in the Hawaiian Islands to defend against a ballistic missile threat from a rogue nation state like the DPRK.
Congressman, I'd like to talk from the NORTHCOM perspective, if you don't mind about that. Even without SBX, I'm confident in my ability to defend against a threat from DPRK to Hawaii today. I support the Hawaii radar. I believe it gives us additional capability for an underlayer that would support defense of Hawaii, specifically giving additional capability and capacity. But let's be clear, at this moment in time, I'm comfortable with my ability to defend Hawaii. That doesn't mean I don't support the sensor, though.
Oh, sorry. I would add that we are looking at how to best improve the defense of Hawaii. The defense of Hawaii.
I suggest we look at both the defense of Hawaii and the defense of the territory of Guam as we shift to the Pacific.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Yeah, both of those.
The gentleman's time has expired. The subcommittee will be adjourned until about 5 o'clock or as soon as votes have ended, and we will meet in 2212 for the closed session. Thank you.